May the Crown please present themselves by name.
I'm Tusaw C. I am a Crown lawyer. Thank you.
Hill A. I'm a Crown lawyer.
Smythe A, Crown lawyer.
Luca P., Crown lawyer.
And from the defense.
Chiskita D, defense lawyer.
Lee C., defense lawyer.
Ahmed K., defense lawyer.
Dick A., defense lawyer.
We are here today to discuss a primary overarching question. Did Debbie Halloran murder Wendy Will Beldam in cold blood, or was she just mentally impaired or having a psychotic break? This was not triggered by a state of psychosis, but rather by Ms. Halloran being a violent, hyperactive killer. The defense will attempt to have you believe that this was an act of self-defense during a psychotic episode. However, we, the Crown, will crystallize her premeditation and sanity during this event. Ms. Halloran knew right from wrong and was cognizant of the choice she was making to take another human's life. Under no circumstances should she be relieved from criminal responsibility. Thank you.
We see that in this case, the prosecution is telling you that Debbie Halloran can control her anger, that she's not mentally ill, and that she's a monster. But today we're calling a court-licensed psychologist and even Debbie Halloran herself to tell you that this is simply not true. Debbie Halloran is not guilty. Thank you.
What do psychological episodes and breaks do to a person?
So you can experience many symptoms during a psychotic break. For example, you may experience delusions, hallucinations, disorganized behavior, catatonia, along with other negative symptoms such as depression, sleep issues, racing thoughts, and other kinds of things that would affect your day-to-day life.
And is normal human behavior often shown in patients experiencing a breakdown?
No, not when they're experiencing their breakdown. Well, it depends. Like, someone experiencing a psychotic break, depending on the delusion, could determine right from wrong. But also, someone experiencing a delusion will not be able to differentiate between reality and their delusion.
And you say that you met Ms. Halloran after the murder, correct?
Yes.
Would you say through your experiences with her, Ms. Halloran was a violent person?
I would not think that, no. After I've spent about 144 hours in private sessions with her, and she is not someone who I deem has violent thoughts.
So, do you think Ms. Halloran is capable of committing an act as violent as murder?
I think anyone is capable of committing murder. I think the question at hand is, was her intent to commit murder?
No further questions, Your Lord.
Do you specialize in a particular field of psychiatry?
Yes, I specialize in psychotic, schizophrenic, and bipolar disorder.
And when did you start treating Ms. Halloran?
I'm a state-mandated psychiatrist for Ms. Halloran, so I started seeing her immediately after the incident in late March. As of today, I've been seeing her for 8 months, and we've spent a total of 144 hours in private sessions.
Objection, my lord. I never admitted this into evidence.
Was this not admitted?
It was admitted to evidence lately because the prosecution and defense have seen it.
I have not agreed on this evidence.
Excuse me, Lord? The prosecution did agree to this evidence.
When?
Okay, voir dire. You guys haven't had this done before. We're going to do this on the fly. Voir dire is a, what was it mean in French? Cisse. So what we're doing is a case within a case. I want to get this wrapped up in under 10 minutes. What you're going to have is one representative from each of the two teams approach the bench, and you're going to argue for why this piece of evidence should be included.
Can you take a look at this evidence and can you tell us if the doctor who wrote these notes fulfilled their duties to the patient, Ms. Holland?
Judging by the sloppiness and irrelevancy of these notes, the therapist in question is either highly underqualified or incompetent. I have determined with confidence that Ms. Halloran is suffering from psychotic disorder with schizophrenic and bipolar tendencies. She experiences intense delusions, disorganized speech, vivid hallucinations, along with other adverse symptoms related to schizophrenia and bipolar disorder. Ms. Halloran has psychotic disorder specifically marked with stressors, meaning that her symptoms can be triggered by many events that would be deemed stressful to a reasonable person.
Do you believe the defendant was experiencing delusion when the event occurred?
Yes. Ms. Halloran was experiencing a persecutory delusion, to be specific. When these types of delusions occur, an individual feels scared of ordinary situations, threatened without reason, has an urge to report to authorities, and undergoes a massive amount of paranoia, stress, and worry. Persecutory delusions are characterized by paranoia that one is being conspired against, spied on, followed, drugged, as well as other paranoid beliefs. Ms. Halloran's delusion of her being conspired against and her ungrounded fear clearly show the nature of her delusion and her sickness.
And as a professional, would you say that Ms. Halloran has any type of anger issues?
Ms. Halloran does not have anger issues. There was never any issues reported at her place of work, rather than the time that she was attacked by someone else.
Okay, thank you. And can you please describe the delusion the delusion the defendant was experiencing?
Yes. Due to her illness, Ms. Halloran became convinced that Ms. Beldam and a few others were conspiring to kill her. Shortly after Ms. Beldam returned to stay with Ms. Halloran for a second time, Ms. Halloran became convinced that she was sent by conspirators to help murder her. At one point, Ms. Halloran claimed to have seen Ms. Beldam carrying a knife in her hand. Ms. Halloran was terrified, and she was worried that Ms. Beldam would attack her at any moment. Ms. Halloran thought she needed to protect herself from being murdered, so she retrieved her gun. When she approached Ms. Beldam in her sleep, she was convinced that Ms. Beldam was only pretending to be unconscious, so Ms. Halloran would let her guard down. Though it was mentally and emotionally strenuous, Ms. Halloran shot Ms. Beldam under the influence that it was the only choice she had besides certain death.
We would now like to call Richard Watson to the stand. Be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
Two.
When did you arrive at the apartment building in question?
Around 10:20.
What did you do when you got to the apartment?
I waited outside. I was locked out. I waited for somebody to unlock the doors and then followed him in, caught the door, then proceeded to ring all nine floors of doorbells.
Why did you do this?
I was bored.
Would you not agree that the opening and closing of doors would make some noise?
Sure, people were pretty quiet. I think everybody was kind of concerned that everybody else was asleep.
No one caught you during your prank, right?
A couple of people saw me disappear around corners.
Did they catch you or?
Catch me? No, they just saw me go.
So just to clarify, on the night of March 23rd, you ran out of the hallway from 10:20 to 11 p.m. wearing all black.
Yes.
By doing so, you made some noise and disturbed some of the tenants.
I wouldn't say I disturbed anybody, except for when they had to get up and answer the door thinking that they had some customers.
I'd like to call Teddy Turco to the stand.
Tell you the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. So help you God.
Yes.
Yes, I do.
What kind of relationship did you have with Mrs. Halloran?
It was very platonic. I only spoke to her at work. It wasn't like we went for coffee or anything.
What was your first impression of Mrs. Halloran when you met her?
She seemed very sweet at first, but over time she seemed to become quite irritable.
Did she have any psychotic episodes while working on the job?
No, she did not.
Was Mrs. Halloran ever violent?
Yes, and she definitely became more violent after the injury.
And how violent did Mrs. Halloran become after the incident?
Oh, much worse. She threatened to slam people into walls or break plates over their heads. She punched two men in the groin on separate occasions, and she even accidentally broke one of our colleagues' hands by slamming her coffee mug on the table too hard.
So, in conclusion, would you say Mrs. Halloran is a violent person?
Unfortunately, yes, I would.
Objection, my lord. Opinion.
Sustain.
At any time during any of the phone calls, did she tell you anything was wrong?
Yes, during the first call, she mentioned that it was unclear who she was walking around with tampons.
And what was the first?
Objection, Lord. Relevance.
Sustain.
Did Mrs. Halloran say something strange in any of the other three calls?
Yes, her story progressively started to get strange and misconstrued. In the third call, instead of tampons, she mentioned that it was a knife that someone was coming at her with.
And is it most likely that it happened before the fourth call?
During the first three calls, she sounded so panicked. I was honestly quite worried. But then between the time frame, I assumed that something must have happened between the third and fourth call. There was a long wait, and then the fourth call, her story was so clear, like as if no panic was left. I was quite confused.
Would you consider yourself a friend of the defendant?
I wouldn't say a friend, more so an acquaintance.
So you would agree that she seemed afraid?
I wouldn't say afraid, more so panicked.
And you did try to calm her down?
I tried as best I could, but knowing her tendencies from when she was violent back at the dispatch, I knew that there wasn't much I could do over the phone.
Anyway, moving on. So the defendant seemed scared as if she were in danger, correct?
Sure, I guess you could say danger, but again, she sounded panicked. It was more so panic than fear, if that makes sense.
No, can you distinguish between the two?
Yes, I can. She sounded panicked, like it wasn't as though she was necessarily fearing for her life, but more so trying to come up with a story. Like her words weren't clear.
We now call Delbert Harris to the stand.
Shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God.
I do.
Is it true that Miss Halloran is also one of your neighbors on the 9th floor?
Yes, this is true. She lives 2 doors down from me.
Do you remember what you were doing at around 11 p.m. on the night of March 23rd, 2020?
Yes, I do. So I just finished dinner, sitting on my couch, took a few hits of the joint. All of a sudden I hear my doorbell being rung.
Do you remember about what time you heard your doorbell being rung?
Yes, exactly 11:10. I remember looking at the
Objection. If the witness was high at the time, can they properly testify to the time?
We'll get to it.
clock. Okay.
Overruled. Definitely you could remember certain things from being high, I assume.
Did you see anything or anyone when checking outside?
Yeah, when I looked to my left, I saw Debbie Halloran.
Did you and Miss Halloran exchange any words at this time?
Yeah, she told me to call 911 and she said that somebody was going to kill her.
What did you tell the 911 operator?
So, I mean, I called 911 and then I heard the woman's phone on the other line and I couldn't do it. I couldn't do it. I dropped the phone down. I regret it now. I feel like I should have called her, but I just couldn't do it. I was scared.
Did you hear anything else that night?
Yeah, I did. In the morning, I woke up and there was a bunch of these loud, ton of booms, and they were gunshots. And at first, I thought it was the fire. I thought it was fireworks. All these Brentwood and Kelsey kids always running around with the nonsense of the fireworks. And it's Mill Bay, for God's sake. I didn't think there would be gunshots, but there were a ton of loud booms.
And when did you hear gunshots coming from Miss Halloran's apartment?
5 a.m. I looked at my alarm clock.
Okay. On the night of 23rd of March, could you hear Mr. Watson burning it down, or as he said, tiptoeing, or?
My lord bleeding?
Sustained.
How were Miss Halloran's actions when she came to you, or when she talked to you?
She seemed panicked.
The Crown would like to call Stuart Ullman to the stand.
Show me the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth will help you God.
Yes, I do.
And did you ever overhear Miss Halloran arguing with Miss Belden?
Yes, I frequently heard the two arguing as the walls of my apartment are paper thin. The arguing became more frequent when Miss Belden decided she was moving to Calgary.
So when did Miss Belden return from Calgary?
Well, the night of the murder.
And what did you see when you opened the door?
I saw my neighbor, who lives 2 doors down, throwing out liquor containers at the end of our hall.
And can you please identify that this was Miss Halloran, and can you please point at her?
It's Miss Halloran.
And did Miss Halloran seem intoxicated to you?
No, I wouldn't say so. She looked fine.
And following your interaction, what were you doing?
Well, I went to use the washroom and I went back to bed. But I was woken to the sound of gunshots at 5 a.m.
Lord, I'd like to call into evidence the video of Miss Halloran's apartment. We can stop the video here. And Mr. Ullman, can you tell me what number that is exactly?
Objection. That is the floor number, the 9th floor.
Lord, absolutely not. That is a house number on the door. Would you not agree that it is impossible for you to live in the 47 room as you claimed?
I'd say so.
Okay, so did you lie to the court when you mentioned that?
Yes.
That would make history of lying. It's potentially true that you've lied in other points of your testimony.
No, ma'am.
And why should the court believe that? And you mentioned in an examination in chief that you identified the bottles as being liquor bottles, correct?
Yes, ma'am. White Claws.
And would you agree that the garbage being 8 meters away from you is what is true in your apartment building?
Well, garbage is at the end of the hall, not 8 meters.
Would you not agree that the clerk submitted into evidence that it was specifically 8 meters away? So is
Lord,
there-
could I ask her to point out in the evidence where that is?
The clerks did already state this, if we need to.
When?
May we approach the bench more?
Are we doing this again? Okay.
The evidence reviewed, or the supposed evidence that has been reviewed currently, has been struck.
I would like to call up the same evidence I did before the video, please. Looking back at the previous time where you perjured yourself, why should anyone in the court believe that specific testimony that you just gave? Again, no response? Okay, thank you. So again, just for clarification, I'd like to ask one more time. Why should anyone in this court believe that you
My Lord, badger him.
Sustained.
Constable Gibson, and these shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God.
Could you describe for the court what happened that led you to the crime scene?
Yes, I got a call from Stuart Ullman saying that he had heard gunshots coming from his neighbor's apartment.
When did you get to the crime scene?
I left the station at about 5:02 a.m., so I would have arrived at about 5:15 a.m.
Now, what did the crime scene look like when you got there? Could you just describe it in as much detail as possible, please?
Mrs. Halloran was adamant on trying to keep me from going into the room, and she kept trying to justify killing Mrs. Belden before I had even had the chance to see the body. When I went into the room, I found the body of Wendy Lynn Belden lying on her bed covered in fresh blood. There was a new box of tampons on the ground with only a few missing.
Please show the video. Let the constable speak.
At the scene of the crime, right where that jacket is where the tampons are missing.
Now that that's over with, can we continue with our questioning?
Please.
How many rounds are on the apartment floor?
13 rounds.
How many rounds does the firearm in question hold?
The Browning SA-22, the model owned by Ms. Halloran, can hold 5 bullets before reloading.
So does this mean, assuming all the bullets were from the same gun and fired at the same event, that Mrs. Halloran had to reload?
Yes, twice in fact.
Can you say with 100% confidence that the gunshots were the cause of death?
Yes.
And before I heard you mention fresh blood, could you elaborate on that?
Yes, the blood I saw at the scene would seem very fresh, probably within the last 30 minutes, I'd say. Blood that tends to form in a puddle like that tends to dry quite fast, and it was still very wet.
Did you see anything in the kitchen when you first walked in?
Yes, when I went into the kitchen, there was blood on the counter next to the sink. The insides of the sink were wet and were colored a little bit pink, so I would assume that someone had washed their hands of the blood before I arrived.
So essentially what I'm trying to get here today, is that were or were not the tampons moved?
How am I to know that?
Well, I'm simply asking because you were at the crime scene, were you not?
At the specific time, yeah?
Yes, and would you not agree that when a police officer shows up, that traditionally the photographs are then taken at that point so that you can preserve the evidence?
That is correct.
So then I'm asking, why are there no tampons in the evidence when you claim that there were?
Because they were under the jacket.
Thank you. So they were under the jacket, meaning today that the evidence was tampered with, correct?
My Lord, this is getting repetitive. She's asked the same
My
question
Lord,
like 4 times.
The witness will not answer the question and keeps going around in
My
circles.
Lord, he's answered the question thoroughly a couple times.
Sustained. I don't believe that having an item over something means necessarily being tampered.
Can you tell us if you got any police training involving mental health? Any way to handle that?
There wasn't a mental health section in the police training, no.
Perfect.
But
Then how can you tell the court today any analysis on Ms. Halloran's behavior if you have no historical or any knowledge on mental health?
I do, since I've been called to the scene of the crime where
So you would say that past events of mental health give you a justifiably good enough knowledge of mental health?
yeah.
So in the 2 events that you listed, you were somehow able to learn what doctors spend 4 years attempting to learn?
I didn't say that, but I said I have a pretty good idea of being able to tell.
You can look at your notes for this question. Did Ms. Halloran claim that she thought the victim was trying to kill her or that she knew the victim was trying to kill her?
Neither were clearly stated in her testimony.
And then, can you state to the court the exact wording of Ms. Halloran's confession?
She said, I called the caretaker, I shot and killed the girl inside. She thought I was sleeping. She came at me with a knife. I had no other choice, so I shot her. Okay.
And did Ms. Halloran ever disclose to you any other motive for the crime than self-defense?
No.
The defense calls Deborah Halloran to the stand.
Shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Yes.
Ms. Halloran, could you please describe your relationship with the victim, Ms. Belden?
We were close acquaintances. We worked together and lived together, so inevitably we would become close.
So you lived together, but were you ever romantically involved or sexually involved with her?
No.
What's your history like with mental illness?
I haven't ever really had too much, other than I struggle with a lot of an almost real imagination and a lot of distractions throughout life.
Does your family know about this?
Yes.
Have you ever been to therapy for your mental conditions?
I went twice before these events, and then after the incident occurred, I've been meeting with Dr. Torrance.
We've heard previously that you were taking out White Claws, to be specific. Can you confirm this?
They could have been from other times. I was not drinking that night. I had strictly water and some pop, nothing alcoholic.
Okay. We've heard earlier that on the night in question, bells were ringing throughout the apartment. Did you hear this?
Oh yes, of course, constantly.
How did this make you feel?
Made me feel very panicked, and I got very, very paranoid and lost a lot of control of my own mental state. So I just kind of declined from there, and it caused a lot of issues.
In your statement, you talked about a union that's out to get you. Could you tell us a bit more about that, please?
Yes. 5 years ago, I was driving a cab when one of the union workers, one of the laborers from the union, was one of my passengers, and he actually struck me on the head and left me with and he robbed me.
Was Miss Belden part of the union?
Yes.
And you talked about in your statement that she was out to get you?
Oh, fully. She's part of the union. So.
And the union was out to get you?
Yes.
You're not a usually aggressive person, are you?
Oh, I'd like to think not. No.
Right. So is it fair to say that in the situation on the night in question, it was kill or be killed?
Oh, definitely. It was fully actions of self-defense.
So, would you not agree that earlier Teddy Turkle stated that you had become more injured?
That could have been how she saw it. I was strictly acting out of how psychosis, and that has affected me.
So you do agree that you told Mr. Harris that you killed Miss Belden at approximately 11 p.m.?
Yeah.
And you stated earlier that Miss Belden was part of the union that was out to get you, correct?
Yes.
And you also stated that you had known this, correct?
Yes, I had.
So if you had known that Miss Belden was part of the union, why did you let her continue to live with you even after she had gotten back from Calgary?
Because she was just coming to get a few things, and we were friends, so I'm always going to be there to support her. Also, when she first moved in, it was before the incident with the union, so that wouldn't have mattered then.
When did you actually kill Miss Belden?
I'm pretty foggy on that. The whole time I was very paranoid about it, and it did look like she was holding a weapon, which brought attention to my own life and my own well-being. So the whole night I was quite paranoid about it, so I don't actually know the specific moment when I took the action to do it.
So are you saying you were unaware if you had killed Miss Belden before you had told Mr. Harris or after?
Oh, I killed her after. Before I told Mr. Harris, I told him after I killed her.
You killed her and then told Mr. Harris, correct?
Yeah.
All right. Would you not agree that earlier in the court case, the doctor stated that during a psychotic episode, things tend to get rapid and you tend to lose control of yourself?
Oh.
Would you not agree with that statement?
I fully agree with that. You lose control of almost everything.
Yeah. So during your psychotic episode, you were erratic for multiple days, yet there was a brief period of about half an hour where you were not erratic at all, and that was when you were talking to the police
Well,
officer.
I don't know if it was specifically half an hour, because he was only at my house for half an
The
hour.
witness has
so I don't
multiple
know.
times stated that she does not remember exactly what happened this night. The lawyer is badgering Ms. Halloran on the basis of trying
I'm
to
simply
describe
trying
what
to get a
happened.
clearer understanding of the events in play.
Overruled, however, I would advise you to please be curt and please get to the point.
Okay. Could you explain to the court exactly what happened that night?
I can recall as much as I can, but I can't say it with 100% accuracy as it was in the middle of a psychotic break.
I was in my apartment for all of the night except for when I went out to take the trash out. When the doorbells were ringing, it was causing my psychosis and my paranoia and all of my mental instabilities to rise and to get to an uncontrollable and extremely painful level. When I took the recycling or trash out, I saw Mr. Harris, and this was after the events. I had actually killed my close friend out of self-defense, and then I don't really remember too much other than that I called Teddy 4 times. I don't know explicitly what I said, but I know that the first 3 calls I was very, very scattered, and by the 4th, which would have been closer to 5, which is when the police officer came, I had calmed myself down a little bit and tried to recuperate, and that's kind of all I can recall.
Okay. I'd like to ask you, if Teddy here described that your first call, you seemed anxious that someone was about to get you, but according to you, this was after you had already killed somebody. Could you explain to the court why you were anxious about somebody trying to kill you?
Because Miss Beldam isn't the only person part of the union.
Mm-hmm.
It's a big group of people, and one minuscule action towards it doesn't fully save me from everything.
No further questions. My lord.
Yes, Miss Halloran, on the night of March 23rd, killed Miss Beldam under the impression that she was acting in self-defense. It is clear that under extreme stress and pressure, Miss Halloran acted and reacted in the best way that she could think of in the heat of the moment. She believed, as you have heard from her multiple times, that she was going to be killed. It was her or Miss Beldam. How are we, as the court today, meant to believe in anything that was said by side prosecution when they can't even seem to get their witnesses, and their witnesses can't even seem to get their stories straight? The defenses gave you a clear narrative, a logical narrative, and let us not forget, a factual narrative. Thank you so much for listening to the evidence today, and I hope that you will agree that Miss Halloran was, under Section 16 of the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, experiencing a psychotic break, which means that she is innocent in this case, as continued to be brought up by the precedent that was introduced in our opening statement of the King versus Porter. In this question, talking about the act of a crime versus the responsibility for a crime. Thank you so much.
Judge, you are looking beautiful tonight. All right.
My lord, Count is flirting with the judge. Stay.
This is a case about mental health, not the fact of the matter of actually what occurred that night. This is a battle about if she was in a good state of mind or if she was not. As noted by Evidence B, as I looked at it for a couple minutes, there was an uncertain phrase on it, one that wrote, "Is it fake?" ? And we find that these doctors don't even know if she was faking it during the night in question. And we believe that these doctors, as proposition, we have to believe are incapable of being doctors, being psychiatrists. We find that they went through schooling. They went through psychiatry school, doctor school, and that's a very challenging field. We find that these doctors writing these notes are trustworthy as they've been hired they've been hired.
Objection, my lord, the jury.
Can you object in closing statement? No, you can't object in closing statement. We find it incredibly unlikely that these doctors were underprepared or unqualified, and that they went through a very challenging profession in a very challenging field. We find their notes are of much importance. Why would they be unimportant if you tried so hard to admit them into evidence? We find that the fact that they admitted them into evidence, and the fact that it wrote fake, ? We find that even the doctors don't know if it was fake on the night or not. She also admitted during cross-examination that she took out the garbage at 10:30 p.m. Can you find a contradiction anywhere in the case? I certainly can. Kiara stated that it couldn't have happened because there are garbage cans in the apartment. Why would the lawyer use the video to say that there was no way she could have taken out the garbage at this time? But then the witness herself said that it did happen. She also stated that while the doorbells were being rung is when her mental state started to decline. She said that, that's a quote, that her mental state started to decline while the doorbells were being rung. If she murdered the witness, if she murdered Miss Beldam before the doorbells were being rung at like 10:20 as she stated, then her mental state wouldn't have declined yet. She'd be completely aware of her surroundings. If her mental state had declined after she had killed him, then we find it completely, how would I say this? No. We ought to convict her on the fact that she wasn't mentally impaired during the time when the murder took place, as she said, before 11, also before her mental state declined. I rest my case.
So on the case at hand, the jury has deliberated, and we have decided to find the defendant guilty.
I now sentence the defendant, Debbie Halloran, to 15 years in prison. 15 years in prison.